Prices may vary in-store and online. School on, save on at Staples.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The NBA approved 2 rules changes for next season that could have a major impact. Coaches will be allowed a second challenge if their first one is successful. Coaches were limited to 1 challenge of a referee's call. The NBA also passed a new flopping rule. Players hit with a flopping charge will get a technical foul. The opposing team will get a free throw attempt and possession of the ball. The NBA experimented with the new flopping rule in the Summer League in Las Vegas. NBA execs were tired of seeing players fall to the floor in an attempt to draw a foul. At least 5 players from HBCU schools were selected in the Major League Baseball draft, which ended on Tuesday. The first HBCU player taken was Nolan Santos, a right-handed pitcher at Bethune-Cookman. Santos was chosen by the Minnesota Twins. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is dedicated to empowering our communities by providing progressive talk radio for our audience. We strive to be an intersectional voice for the voiceless. As a Black-owned and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
I'm Tavis Smiley. This is KBLA Talk 1580. Phone number 1-800-920-1580, 1-800-920-1580. In this hour, why do some tragedies capture our attention and empathy more than others? Throughout history, we've witnessed contrasting responses to all kinds of calamities unfolding before our very eyes, whether it's the divergent reactions to the sinking of a packed migrant boat off the coast of Greece or the submersible accident recently near the iconic Titanic wreckage. There is a stark contrast, it seems to me, in the way these incidents are portrayed and perceived by the media and by the public. So, here's the question. Why does one tragedy ignite widespread compassion while another seemingly fades into obscurity? What are the psychological mechanisms at play when it comes to our sympathy, our empathy, our compassion fatigue, and the selective attention given to certain events over others? Dr. Jessica Gall Myrick is a communications professor at Penn State University and joins us now for a conversation on the underlying factors that shape our responses to the media coverage that we see, the power of familiarity, and the ethical responsibilities of media organizations in shaping public discourse. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Jessica Gall Myrick to this program. Professor Myrick, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Tavis.
I'm delighted to have you on. Thank you for the time. Glad we have an hour. There's a whole lot to unpack, and again, I'm going to make the most of this time that we have together. Let me start with the last point that I made, because we just wrapped a rich conversation for the last hour. with a guest who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, wrote for the New York Times, worked for the LA Times. We were just talking about the pushback he received at certain points in his career for trying to do his job, to be transparent, to expose truths as a reporter, specifically for the Los Angeles Times. He now teaches at Syracuse while you teach at Penn State. So I want to start with this notion of the media's responsibility, media organizations' responsibility in shaping public discourse. How do you see that? And we'll jump from there.
That's a great question, and they have a huge responsibility. I'm a former journalist myself, turned academic. Journalists are in our Constitution. You can't really deny the role of the media in shaping public discourse. The question is, in our media system, we have a mostly for-profit media structure, and what gets attention is what's going to get reported. And so that's where a lot of the tension is juggling those democratic responsibilities with what will get attention. And I think in our social media-based news environment, we have to get more creative in figuring out ways to make important stories attention-grabbing.
Even in a for-profit scenario, we'll interrogate that in just a moment. But even in a for-profit media scenario, there are still ethical responsibilities that these organizations have in shaping public discourse. Talk to me about the ethics of the way they do things or don't these days.
Sure. It's a big media ethics is a huge topic, and it's of course we teach to all of our communication students here, but it's about trying to get people the information they need to be good citizens and doing it in a way that's transparent, and that means different things to different organizations and to different people. A lot of what I study is the psychology of how people respond to news stories. And so I think, we need to balance those goals of informing and engaging and making sure that one doesn't outweigh the other. When it gets too much on the side of just pure engagement, sensationalism, then that's, not meeting the ethical duties of the company, and sort of not to harp too much on the for-profit point, but I think media companies can brand themselves as being ethical. You could actually use it as a strength if done right. And so and especially in an era where we see a lot of misinformation out in the media environment, that it's even more important than ever before, but also could become a strength of any particular outlet in really emphasizing ethics and transparency.
Yep. Now, I hear the point you make, and this is why I wanted to have you on specifically to talk about the psychological mechanisms at play when we read or watch whatever we read or watch. So we'll get to that. Again, we can talk about a variety of things, the submersible accident and why that got so much attention versus, again, those migrants who died after that ship was sunk off the coast of Greece, and any number of other examples we could offer. We'll get to that in a moment, I promise. One last question about this for-profit model, since you raised it. To what extent, or let me rephrase that, how, yeah, that's what I want to say. How do you think our for-profit media model impacts the news that we get?
Yeah, it prioritizes attention over the actual nature of the content. And the analogy that we sometimes use is fast food versus getting your vegetables. And we've gone through different phases in time where media, at the beginning of the United States, there were a lot of tabloids, and there was a lot of misinformation as well. So this is not brand new to the social media era. But because we have this data and these metrics, and companies can see, okay, which headlines are getting clicked on more than others, and they can very quickly have the information about what will go viral, get shared, and therefore what they can sell advertisements. And it's not to say that this is evil or bad, but what's interesting is when you look at the U.S. system compared to some other systems, Great Britain, for example, they have for-profit media companies, but they also have a very strong, government-sponsored BBC. Canada has the CBC, for example. So there's a little bit more balance as far as types of models, and you don't get just that mainly attention-driven. That's not to say we also have public radio and television, of course, in our country, but it's again this sort of tension between what is maybe the most important information versus what will get the most attention, and also what is cheapest to produce. We see this in broadcast television news, for example, big mega corporations buying up these smaller local stations, and then they just reuse packages that are national. I live here in Pennsylvania, and if I watch my local evening news, I'll see a story about someone in Texas, and that's run on all the stations owned by that one broadcast mega company, because it's cheaper than them hiring extra reporters here in central Pennsylvania to go out and do digging. So I think we see it that way. We're seeing a lot less local news, and that also has been tied to less voting. Research has literally showed that in areas where there are what we call news deserts, you're getting less local news. People are less likely to be civically engaged, and that's, in my humble opinion, a real travesty and a problem.
No.
So it's a complex situation that there's not going to be one magic solution to, but I think we do see now over time that the corporate consolidation of our media outlets is leading to less, diversity of voices, and it's not necessarily good for democracy.
No, when we come forward, I want to come right to that point, corporate consolidation, or put another way, monopolies. And secondly, I want to ask when we come forward about these billionaires and what you make of these billionaires who all want to be in the news business. I'm putting news in air quotes, whether it's Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post or Elon Musk at Twitter. How do we read that billionaires want to control the news that we read? We'll get those two things out of the way, and then we'll go straight away into why I really wanted Professor Myrick on this program. You can see she can talk about a variety of things, but we're driving toward a conversation about why certain tragedies capture our attention in the media and empathy more than others. So we'll talk about the psychology at work when we read or watch what we read and watch when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about. Good thing we've got 3 hours. More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
The $5 cravings box is back at Taco Bell, and it's the real thing. We're talking a chalupa supreme, a cheesy, beefy 5-layer burrito, a crunchy taco, cinnamon twist, and a medium drink, all for just $5. That's a lot of food for not a lot of dollars. In other words, a wise business deal, like greeting clients with a firm handshake and a delicious 3-course meal. That's only $5. Order your $5 cravings box on the Taco Bell app today. At limited participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only while supplies last. Contact local store for price and participation which vary. Drinks exclude freezes. Price excludes tax.
Need a fresh start? LADWP income qualified customers can get up to $15,000 tax-free to pay overdue water utility bills with the low-income household water assistance program. Benefit amounts may vary and will not impact other benefits. Visit ladwp.com/cares and apply today. That's ladwp.com/cares.
Did you know if you go online to Kohl's.com right now, you can take so much off the price of your favorite Kohl's finds? I just shopped their summer cyber deals and need to talk about it. I saved on a Food Network cookware set for under $65, JBL speakers, a NutriBullet combo blender, and because I bought a cute tea, I got a second one for only $1. Plus, I earned Kohl's cash. So hurry to Kohl's.com for the right finds at the right price right now. Select styles. Offer ends July 12th. BOGO offer ends July 13th. Some exclusions apply. See store or Kohl's.com for details.
Some people won't give you the real talk on drugs, but it's time we know the facts. Fentanyl is killing people. It's a powerful opioid, often made illegally and commonly mixed with illicit drugs. It can even be pressed into counterfeit pills that resemble prescription medications. Just 2 milligrams, about the size of a few grains of sand, could potentially be lethal. This isn't an ad to scare you, but it is an ad to make you think twice. Get the facts. Go to realdealonfentanyl.com. This message is brought to you by the Ad Council.
I'm getting vaccinated with Prevnar 20.
So am I, because I'm at risk for pneumococcal pneumonia.
If you're 19 or older with chronic conditions like asthma, diabetes, COPD, or heart disease, or are 65 or older, you are at increased risk for pneumococcal pneumonia. Ask your doctor or pharmacist about Prevnar 20, pneumococcal 20-valent conjugate vaccine. It can help protect you against pneumococcal pneumonia in just one dose. Even if you've already been vaccinated with other pneumonia vaccines, Prevnar 20 may help provide added protection. Prevnar 20 is approved for adults to help prevent infections from 20 strains of the bacteria that cause pneumococcal pneumonia. Continued approval may depend on a supportive study. Don't get Prevnar 20 if you've had a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine or its ingredients. Adults with weakened immune systems may have a lower response to the vaccine. Side effects include pain and swelling at the injection site, fatigue, headache, muscle, and joint pain. For full prescribing information, please call 1-855-213-2138 or visit Prevnar20.com.
This is a special alert to all Americans who own a vehicle with less than 200,000 miles, with an auto warranty about to expire, or with no warranty coverage at all. Due to a decline in the economy, CarShield is announcing a low-cost, month-to-month vehicle protection plan that is now available to the public to save any driver out-of-pocket expenses on future auto repairs. Call now to find out how you can pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. Yes, you heard that correctly. Pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. An open phone line has been established for all drivers to call for a free quick quote. Call 800-381-8528 now. Drivers who are covered will not have to pay for covered repairs again. This protection plan is at an all-time low. Additionally, drivers who activate this vehicle protection today will also receive free roadside assistance, free towing, and car rental options at no additional cost. Call us for your free quick quote today. 800-381-8528. That's 800-381-8528. What do you have to lose? Call 800-381-8528. Again, 800-381-8528.
Heard any other talk radio lately that sounds anything like this? We didn't think so. You're listening to Unapologetically Progressive, KBLA Talk 1580.
Dr. Jessica Gall Myrick is our guest in this hour as we engage in a conversation about why some tragedies capture our attention and empathy more than others. We'll get to that in just a second here. Let me weave these two things together. Professor Myrick, get your response to this, and we'll jump straight away into the psychology of what we read and watch. You mentioned corporate consolidation. I would call that monopolies, same thing. And I added to that list these billionaires who seem interested. If interested is not the right word, but determined. That's what I'm looking for. I'm reaching for the right word. Determined to own more and more news outlets. I'll put both of those on your plate. Let you respond, and then we'll go to the psychology of what we read.
Yeah, sure. Well, media psychology is definitely my area of expertise, more so than billionaire psychology. But it's absolutely a trend. You're right, and I think it's in the past we've had media barons, a history of them, but they remain sort of behind the scenes. And folks like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, they want to be out there, and they have enough money to do it because of all types of monopolies and the way our taxes are lower for large corporations. It's just the melding of all these different aspects of policy and society and our economy that allow them to have enough money to own these media empires. It's just side businesses. And so it's really the long-term outcome that you can trace back to a lot of different types of deregulation of media ownership in the 80s, but combined with just their corporate profits increase, they can do other things, and these are the other things those billionaires are deciding to do with their money. So it has the added benefit, perhaps for them, that they get more attention and that they can try to control the levers of attention that likewise benefit their other businesses too.
No, it is fascinating though to think of owning the Washington Post or Twitter or any number of other outlets as a side hustle. My phrase, not yours, as a side hustle. But I'll leave that where it is. All right, now to your sweet spot. And again, the reason why I invited you on to talk about the way we view the news that we imbibe. And it occurred to me, in the last couple of weeks to have this conversation precisely and primarily because of the way I saw the world react to that submersible accident near the iconic Titanic wreckage. and it is what it is. But I also was paying attention to the way we were not responding to this boat that was sank with all these migrants, so many of whom died off the coast of Greece. These stories are happening basically in real time, in the same time. One gets exposure, one gets the empathy of the world, the attention of the world, the other doesn't. And then I started thinking over the course of my career about any number of other moments where there were competing narratives, competing stories, and one, again, holds our attention. The other we sort of ignore. It happens when you think about it pretty much every day in this country. And I wanted to sort of probe the psychology behind that, hence your invitation to join this program. So I've set the frame for you. So talk to me about the psychology at work when we watch and read what we take in.
Yeah, sure. So, there's a lot of different things going on. And, the comparison that you pointed out and that a lot of other people pointed out too between the refugee boat in the Mediterranean sinking and the submersible sinking is really stark. And so it's a good place to start the conversation about what do we pay attention to in the news and why. And one of the first principles sort of both news production and media psychology is what's new is news, literally. And unfortunately, refugees dying isn't new. It's a sad aspect of history repeating itself. Now, a tin can going down to see the Titanic with a bunch of rich people on it, that was pretty new to a lot of people. And so there was this really just raw curiosity. Humans are hardwired to pay attention to new things. And so I think that was a big part of it. Psychologically, too, there's something called compassion collapse, and it's a finding in a lot of different contexts, but a lot of them have to do with sort of news and media, is that the more people who are suffering, the less likely we are to feel compassion. Now, that seems a little bit counterintuitive. You would think, oh, more people are hurting, why don't we feel badly for them? And there are some different hypotheses about why this might be, but one of the main ones is the idea that it just is too much. When we know lots of people are suffering, lots of people are dying, we actually sort of mentally protect ourselves from feeling all those bad feelings and all that suffering. So we sort of mute the response. We just become numb to it, really. Whereas if we know the story of a few people and we put names to faces, it's more like reading a story or hearing a story. You get to know the people individually, and that's a lot more engrossing, for better or for worse, than sort of a nameless mass of people who, if we did know all of their hundreds of individual stories, we might not get out of bed the next day. We'd be so depressed. No, so we think it tends to be a sort of a protective mechanism almost.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. I take the point you're making, but here's the rub for me, and here's my pushback. It seems to me that the overwhelming majority of the world, I've not been to every part of the world, but I've been to enough of it. It seems to me that the overwhelming majority of the world can relate, put another way, is closer in proximity to those migrants on that boat than they are to that handful of wealthy people in that submersible. So I hear the point that, this notion of compassion collapse. I love these phrases. Compassion collapse. That's the story of America right about now. I digress. Another conversation for another time. We are in compassion collapse in this country writ large. Again, I'll put a pin in that for now. But it seems to me that when you shared the data, that the more people that are involved in a tragedy, the less we feel connected to it. The fewer people that are involved, the more we can tap in. I sort of get that psychologically, but again, it seems to me that the majority of the world can far more relate in proximity to what these migrants were enduring. Certainly as a black man, I got a whole lot more in common with a migrant on a boat than I do with an uber rich guy who's in a submersible going down to see the wreckage of the Titanic. You take my point. If I'm closer to that experience, if I'm closer to that reality, then why am I so concerned in relating to the submersible and not the migrant on the boat?
Absolutely. And I think what you're getting at is the difference in the type of media coverage we saw. In most of the stories about the people on the boat, we didn't learn anything about them. To highlight that relatableness, that narrative. It was just, very almost just bullet points of facts. Whereas we were learning about the video game controller and the history of the owner's wife was related to people who had died in the Titanic. We were learning nitty-gritty details about those people. And it doesn't mean we felt more compassion towards them, but it was getting at sort of the curiosity and intrigue and the drama of it, too. There was uncertainty around that, whereas, unfortunately, the awfulness had already occurred with the particular refugee boat. So it's the findings in psychology tend to hold true when sort of you hold the context similar between the individuals suffering and the group suffering. In this case, the group who was suffering, the larger group of migrants versus these 5 people, was a pretty different set of facts. So I think I think your point about relatability absolutely is right. And if we covered things like immigration and refugee crises more in a way about shared histories and the humanity of it, we would see more draw to those type of stories.
Yep. So let me ask the uncomfortable question, but you're a professor, so you can handle it. I'm not the first student as I audit your class today. I'm sure I'm not the first student who's asked you an uncomfortable question. So in these 2 particular tragedies that we've used as examples so far in this conversation, there are others we could point to, but the submersible versus the migrant boat off the coast of Greece, there are 2 other issues at play here: race and class. And I wonder what the data tell us about the psychology of how we imbibe the news that we take in, where race and class are concerned. As I said earlier, I have a lot more in common with those migrants on that boat than I do with a bunch of rich white guys going down to see some Titanic wreckage. So what's at play for me also, as I see it, is race and class. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's another one of the stark differences. And there's this whole line of research called the contact hypothesis. And the idea was that if, to put it bluntly, in the 1950s when this research started and then on through the decades, was if white people met a black person and they liked that black person, would they then be less racist? Is the oversimplification of that line of research. And it was somewhat supported. And so then media scholars in the 90s and 2000s said, okay, well, what if you meet, quote unquote, different people of different races through the media? Would that make you less racist, less prejudiced? Et cetera. And they hold
that thought. Hate to cut you off, but I hear something good coming here, and I want to get to that. So we're talking about contact hypothesis, and you heard Professor Myrick say a moment ago. The question was asked in the research: if you knew somebody black, would you feel differently if you came in contact with them in person? Now the question is, if you meet someone black or of different race or different class through the media, how do you respond to that? That's where we're going to pause for a moment. When we come forward, we'll pick right up on that with Jessica Gall Myrick of Penn State University, talking about the psychology of how we process the tragedies that we experience, at least come in contact with through the news. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
A safe place to go loud. A great place for progressive politics. KBLA Talk 1580.
It's a Wednesday. We thank you for joining us here on the Black Information Network. I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest. Congress is taking a deep dive today into the flow of drugs across the southwest border. Republicans on the House Homeland Security Committee claim the head of the Homeland Security is failing on the job. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas will not be a part of today's hearing. Instead, it will be officials from several federal law enforcement agencies. Our next story is out of Michigan, where a jury is ruling that a handwritten will that was found after the late African-American singer Aretha Franklin died is valid. The jury returned the verdict in less than an hour after a 2-day trial in Michigan. Judge Jennifer Callaghan will now consider an 11-page 2010 document and the 4-page 2014 handwritten document. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network and BINnews.com.
There's a brand new crash on the 134 freeway in the Glendale area. It's a two-car collision, 134 westbound at the 5. Not clear which, if any lanes are blocked, but traffic is slow from before the 2 on that westbound 134. Got a new problem on the San Diego freeway in Culver City, northbound 405 before Culver Boulevard. A car has broken down in the right lane. And in Pomona, we have an accident on the 71 northbound before the 10 freeway. You're slow from Holt Avenue.
Staples has great prices on everything you need for back to school. Now save up to 60% on select notebooks, markers, and more. At Staples, school savings are always in session. Offer ends July 29. Prices may vary in-store and online. School on, save on at Staples.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The NBA approved 2 rules changes for next season that could have a major impact. Coaches will be allowed a second challenge if their first one is successful. Coaches were limited to 1 challenge of a referee's call. The NBA also passed a new flopping rule. Players hit with a flopping charge will get a technical foul. The opposing team will get a free throw attempt and possession of the ball. The NBA experimented with the new flopping rule in the Summer League in Las Vegas. NBA execs were tired of seeing players fall to the floor in an attempt to draw a foul. At least 5 players from HBCU schools were selected in the Major League Baseball draft, which ended on Tuesday. The first HBCU player taken was Nolan Santos, a right-handed pitcher at Bethune-Cookman. Santos was chosen by the Minnesota Twins. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
This is KBLA Talk 1580. Talk radio. That's music to your ears. We're unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
You're listening to K-Drip, where we play all the best classic water-wasting hits like watering your lawn during the hottest time of the day and leaky faucets. They're tunes from another time because now that we face a hotter, drier future, every drop counts. Despite an extremely wet winter, keep using less water, fixing leaks, and reusing indoor water for your garden. Visit SaveOurWater.com for more ways to conserve. Up next, brushing your teeth with the water on. K-Drip.
To my hometown, my community. Some of you have known me my whole life. Do you notice anything different about the kids in the neighborhood? Ever paid attention? You might start with gifts, money, attention. These are signs. Child trafficking is happening right here in this town. So don't just watch through the window. Pay attention. Because the more we know, the more we'll all know to say no. Learn the signs to look for and how to help at no-to-say-no.com.
In our community, mental health struggles can sometimes go unnoticed. The suicide rate among Black youth has risen faster than any other ethnic group. Only 1 in 3 African Americans who need mental health care receives it. African American women are only half as likely as their Caucasian counterparts to seek professional mental health services. Even those who guide us spiritually can sometimes face their own challenges. 45% of pastors say they've experienced depression or burnout to the extent they need to take a leave of absence from ministry. As people of faith, it's time to acknowledge it's okay not to be okay. You can pray and get help. Visit normalizehelp.org for more information and resources. Join us in raising mental health awareness in our community. Funded by the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health and the Champion Counseling Center of Faithful Central Bible Church.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
All right, Professor Jessica Gall Myrick of Penn State. Before News, Traffic, and Sports, you were starting to unpack something called the contact hypothesis. We actually repeat the first part of that question, what they were trying to researchers are trying to figure out about how people feel when they come in contact with people who are different. And then we'll get to the second part, the media piece. So just kind of back up and restate that for me, if you will.
Yeah, sure. So in the 1950s, the psychologist Gordon Allport, hypothesized that they were thinking about ways of breaking down racial prejudices, and that a lot of people, the majority in the U.S., white people, were grouping Black people all together. But if they could meet an individual Black person and get to know that person, would that change their prejudice level? And but the answer was yes. Now, it didn't always it didn't work on a large scale. That's a difficult intervention to do with every single racist person in the country. But what it did in my field, media psychology, was it inspired researchers in the 90s to think about, okay, so if you met someone from a different group than you in real life and that changed your stereotypes, could seeing people in the media who are different from you change your stereotypes? And the initial set of experiments, like I mentioned, were done in the 90s, and they actually looked at media featuring LGBTQ individuals, and like Queer Eye for the Straight Guy was one of the shows they studied, and they found that the more people watched these types of shows, they felt like they knew the individuals featured in the shows. And we call that a parasocial relationship, when you feel like you know someone, even though you don't, because you're only seeing them on the television. But it feels like a relationship, and that was able to lessen prejudices against gay men in particular in that study, and it's been repeated in other contexts. So the reason I brought this up is you were talking about the really important point that there are stark class and racial differences in the coverage of the refugee crisis in Europe versus the submersible incident. And we like to, based on this research, you could imagine that, okay, if we told the stories of these people and why they were leaving their countries, and the systems, the history of colonialism that has led to the poverty and the environmental degradation, that if we heard those stories, it might lessen prejudice. But on the contrary, if you think about the submersible, where these were mostly, very elite members of society, that's not really relatable to a lot of us, but it has that added intrigue of perhaps feeling some Schadenfreude, which is a German word. It's pleasure at another's pain, sort of the opposite of compassion. And I think the research does show that we feel that when we think people are different from us. And so it was precisely because of their difference and, let's say, lack of relatability that people engaged with the story, but it wasn't necessarily out of compassion for them, but more like, well, you got what you deserved.
I wonder whether or not you think that what we are experiencing now, because we are exposed to so much negativity in our news, because we see so many sad stories day in and day out, and because we're just inundated with news all day long anyway on our phones, where they're always pinging and et cetera, et cetera. I wonder whether or not you think that writ large as a society we are experiencing what many call compassion fatigue.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think you're definitely getting at something. As a scientist, I always sort of hedge a little bit, like, well, we need more data, but the trend, all the research does show that it is in fact negative news that goes more viral. So then it shows up in our feeds more often, and is more likely to be at the top of the website. And the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads, in television news as well. So we see all this negativity, and I mentioned before that it's hard for us to deal with that. So it's our brains are almost protecting us by becoming numb, because otherwise, how would we go about our day? And so, if you think pre-social media, there was negativity in the news, but we weren't getting it every minute of every day. The way we are now, most research shows we spend more than 5 hours a day on social media. And so thinking about ways in which that information is presented, it's we'll share it if it's negative, but it doesn't mean that we feel good. It doesn't mean that we feel good about the people around us.
Yeah. I was in conversation with somebody on this program the other day, and I made the point that there's a distinct difference, as you well know, between cynicism and skepticism. And I think I don't have any data. As you said a moment ago, we need more data. I don't have any data to underscore this point, but it certainly, I'm doing polling every day as a talk show host, if you take my point. And it seems to me that we have, as a society, moved beyond skepticism to cynicism. So many of us are cynical, perhaps with legitimate reasons, but I think we're a much more cynical society than we are a skeptical society. Not sure it's always been that way, but that's how it feels to me now. Having said that, I wonder, given our cynicism and given our compassion fatigue, whether or not you think the media is still, how might I put this, still pregnant with the kind of power to engage the public, to move the public toward action, and not just to have us turn up our nose or turn a blind eye. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point about cynicism versus skepticism, and it actually takes me back to our earlier discussion about the structure of the media itself. And it used to be that there were only a few sources of news, but they were really highly trusted. And now there are so many sources of news, and we really can barely trust any of them. Even your favorite sources, you still might need to double check.
Right.
And so it makes it harder, and it takes more emotional energy as a citizen, as a news consumer, to really engage with the tricky stories of the day. And so I think that is a change, and we have this cycle of more and more sources, harder to trust any of them. It takes a lot more out of us to engage with any of it all. But to not be too cynical, there are some people who have figured out how to do this. And one example I want to bring up is John Oliver. He uses sarcasm. He is not, you don't feel good necessarily watching a John Oliver bit, but he manages to get people to sit down for 30 minutes and deal with some tricky topics in a really engaging way by using dark humor. And so I think if we, I guess to continue on in my line of work, I like to be a little bit hopeful that if we are creative and think about ways of using emotion and attention and humor to re-engage people and to show them that, okay, you might not be able to deal with every policy ill or every societal ill and injustice out there, but maybe pick one or two that you're passionate about and go from there.
Yep. When we come forward, I want to probe this. It seems to me that there's something I've left out of this conversation that I want to tap into, or give you a chance to tap into, and that is, if we're talking about the psychology again of how we take in the news that we read, and why it is that some tragedies capture our attention and empathy more than others. What's left out of this conversation so far is that somebody is making decisions about what we see, about what we read. And if those persons making those decisions don't look like me, but look like you, well, you see where I'm going. Let me unpack this when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Be sure to like and follow Tavis Smiley at The Real Tavis Smiley and get Twitter updates at Tavis Smiley. The conversation continues when we come forward. Black Lives Matters turns 10, and KBLA Talk 1580 is proud to be the exclusive media partner of the People's Justice Festival. This Saturday, July 15th, 12 to 6 p.m. in Leimert Park. Come join us as we celebrate the life-saving and history-making work of Black Lives Matter to help bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice. There will be live music performances, a children's village, giveaways, vendors, a healing justice space, Skillshare, and amazing speakers including Green Party presidential candidate Dr. Cornel West, live on stage at 4:30 p.m. For more information, go to blmgrassroots.org. That's www.blmgrassroots.org. Dominique DePrima and Tavis Smiley will be main stage hosts throughout the day, and the KBLA Talk 1580 delegation will be out in full force. So, join us this Saturday, July 15th, 12 to 6 p.m. at Leimert Park as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of Black Lives Matter. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
I done plant my seeds, now I'm rooted. Brown skin popping, I'm rooted. You pull the hood out me, I'm rooted. Rooted, nappy head, rooted.
We've got a lot to talk about.
I'm Reverend Gerald, the life coach. Is someone you love struggling with addiction and mental illness? Is improving your family's health important? Want to leave a legacy that your family can grow? Are you ready to enhance your perception of life experiences? Then wake up weekends at 7 a.m. with Urban Family Focus and get the wisdom, opportunity, resources, and motivation to live your best life. Join the conversation on Urban Family Focus Saturday and Sunday at 7 a.m.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black.
KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dominique DePrima from the show First Things First, weekday mornings from 6 to 9. Join us tomorrow with Dr. David Johns, director of leading LGBTQ plus organization, the National Black Justice Coalition. Plus headlines, trending topics, and your phone calls on KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
If you're not following KBLA Talk 1580 on all of our socials, then you're missing out. Download our app and find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on the web at KBLA 1580.
That's right.
Again, you can find all of our socials at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
By the way, if you miss any of our weekday shows in real time, you can always catch up by checking out the podcast of your favorite shows at your leisure. At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black.
Got your black. Follow the leader. Oh my God. Follow the leader. 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 Follow the leader.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley, recipient of the highest honor in the talk radio industry, the coveted Freedom of Speech Award. At Talkers 2023, let's get back to more of Tavis right now on KBLA Talk 1580.
Professor Myrick, we established earlier in this conversation, we didn't need to establish it, people saw it for themselves, that the news media went all in on that missing Titanic submersible. They went overboard, pardon the pun, in their coverage, according to many. We were contrasting that at the same time with this wreckage, the sinking of the boat off the coast of Greece that was full of migrants. And many died in that tragedy. We're using these two as examples while there are many others because they happened pretty much simultaneously. I come back to that because somebody in these various news outlets were making decisions about what they were going to overboard on, what they were going to give us more of and less of. And it seems to me that that also has something to do with the way psychologically that we tap in or not, in part, given who puts this stuff in front of us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. The Pew Research Center has surveyed journalists for a long time, and their most recent survey found that I believe is more than 3/4 of all journalists in the U.S. are white. Mm-hmm. And those are just the journalists. You know, thinking about the editors and the ownership who make a lot of the decisions. When the submersible incident was going on, I was interviewed by some prominent news outlets, and I was talking to one reporter about, well, there's the refugee boat, and he said, I've been begging my outlet to cover this, but they've put me on this beat today. Mm-hmm. And, so, yeah, we do not have the full range of life experiences. And if you think about, too, from a class standpoint, being a journalist does not pay very well. And so, you know, you need people who can be self-sufficient. A lot of journalists are now freelancers, and you just can't do that if you have to make enough money to put a roof over your head. You don't have a trust fund or family support or something like that. So, yeah, we're definitely, I think, the gatekeepers are part of the problem for sure.
Yep. I wonder, and this is the big question. We've got just a few minutes left here. Let me start it now. We'll continue it when we come forward. Back to this notion of compassion collapse. How concerned are you about that? And I guess the more salient point is whether or not there's anything to be done in this moment in American history about our compassion collapse. It seems that we're getting farther and farther and farther apart. Politically, socially, economically, culturally. So I don't know if there's anything to be done about it, but you're the expert here, not me. So let me ask you whether or not there's anything to be done about our compassion collapse.
Yeah, you know, maybe it's because I'm a professor, but sort of my first line response to that is to talk about it and to educate people about it. That is happening, and that if you only consume this type of news, or if we don't notice these patterns in news coverage, then we're more susceptible to them. So I think the first sort of basic thing we can do as individuals is to be aware of our media use and to call out media outlets that are, you know, not telling important stories or leaving important perspectives out. And then, you know, there are other things we can think about as far as, you know, preventing monopolies and, you know, providing funding grants to more diverse news outlets and things like that we could do from a systems perspective or societal perspective. But I think as individuals, it's really important that we are thinking about the ways in which we use media, when we use it, how it makes us feel, and you know, I mentioned this before, sort of finding the causes we can latch onto to feel hopeful, and to not just be full of despair. If we recognize we're losing compassion, and compassion is the thing that makes us connect to other people, then finding ways where we can sort of channel that emotion into causes we believe about, I think will help people then, you know, deal with the constant negative flow of information. And we found that a little bit in research we've done, where if people are put into a good mood, you ask them to recall a happy time in their lives, and they're actually better at consuming negative news or learning about they might be at risk of a particular health threat. It's actually called the mood as resource phenomenon. So finding ways to have these little moments of relief or joy, and then be a good citizen and make sure you're up to date on the latest, you know, policy issues is what we can do as individuals. And then from newsroom side, diversifying the newsroom, thinking about the creative ways of telling different stories, especially in the social media era where visuals are important too. So there's a lot going on. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hope there's something we could do. And I just mostly study the media side of it. So I'm always thinking about, okay, how can we educate people about what's going on and think about ways of motivating news outlets to make more meaningful content.
Nope, you acquitted yourself nicely in answer to that question. When we come forward in our remaining moments with Professor Myrick, we'll wrap this conversation about the phenomenon of selective empathy and its implications for media coverage on KBLA Talk 1580.
The station you turn to when you've had it up to here with cultural incompetence. KBLA Talk 1580.
When you can find everything you need at prices you can afford, that's totally Target. It's that feeling when quality Good and Gather ingredients on the barbecue bring family around the table. Or when favorite day after practice snacks let you celebrate the whole team for less. It's when saving more on Up and Up sunscreen means more fun in the sun. And when Target Circle Rewards program gives you more perks on what you buy most and is always free to join, that's totally Target.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin Ultra Strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Interrogating your assumptions and expanding your inventory of ideas. Let's get back to Tavis Smiley on KBLA Talk 1580.
Our guest in this hour has been Dr. Jessica Gall Myrick, who is a communications professor at Penn State University. We spent the majority of this hour talking about why some tragedies capture our attention and empathy more than others. I want to look at my clock here, just a couple minutes left here. I want to pivot, if not so gently, in these last couple of minutes to something that I know you researched and talked about. And I'm only fascinated because of the last few days I've been seeing this TV commercial everywhere about Shark Week. So you know where I'm going vis-a-vis your research.
Yeah.
So Jason Momoa, I guess, is the host this time around of the Shark Week. It's such a popular series on television. When that Shark Week thing happens, the ratings just go through the roof. You've done some research on that. I don't need to color it much more than that. But tell me about your research on what happens when we watch Shark Week.
Yeah, sure. So one of my good friends who I actually went to journalism school with before I went back and got my PhD, she worked for Oceana, which is an ocean conservation group, and they had put together these public service announcements to run during Shark Week about how important sharks are for the ecosystem, and we need to do all we can to, preserve their habitats. And we were just talking about this, and I said, but I'm watching days and days of shark attacks, like 30 seconds of some, blonde celebrity telling me sharks are are good for us is not going to really change how I feel. So, we decided we would study it, and that's pretty much exactly what we found was that a little 30-second PSA placed against, and in our study we only used these like 3-minute clips of shark attacks. People were still really scared of sharks, and especially if they saw really violent attacks. There are some parts of Shark Week that are, I would say, more educational. Sharks being sharks, they're swimming around. They actually very, very rarely attack humans. The most deadly animal for humans are mosquitoes because they carry all these deadly diseases. But our brains are hardwired to be scared of giant predators. So I guess my message would just be that, if we're going to encourage environmental conservation efforts, Shark Week is not the time to do it because that's when everyone's really scared of sharks. So environmental advocates and shark advocates need to find some other time to run those advertisements because they're not super effective. But violence does get our attention. That's for sure.
It does indeed. I could spend hours talking about just pivoting to another conversation about the ways in which we are empathetic toward animals, but not toward each other as human beings. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm out of time. The show is over for today. But I thought about that as you were speaking. Dr. Myrick, thank you for your time on the program today. Thanks for your insights. Good to have you on.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's our show for today. 3 hours gone. Just like that. Time to make room now for the KBLA Midday Money Chain. Up next, the Millionaires Roundtable with Lynn Richardson, to be followed by Ahead of the Crypto Curve with Naja Roberts. Old money, new money. Either way, we got you covered here on KBLA Talk 1580. Thanks for tuning in as always. And until tomorrow morning, Lord willing, and as always, keep the faith.
KBLA 1580